to ask the Scottish Government what its position is about whether, without the use of private finance to enable construction of key infrastructure projects, there is a risk that Scotland could be seen as less attractive for inward investment and as a location for business compared with other European countries.
Cabinet Secretary Shona Robertson.
So Scotland remains a highly competitive location for inward investment, consistently delivering jobs and economic benefit. EY data shows that in 2024, Scotland was the UK's leading destination for inward investment outside London for the 10th consecutive year and is ranked 6th among the top 10 FDI destinations in Europe. We will continue work with the Scottish Futures Trust to explore revenue funding options for infrastructure investment, and this aims to unlock additional private investment while ensuring value for money for the public purse.
Fergus Ewing.
An analysis of the capital budget, both for this and next year, shows that the sum of it devoted to trunk roads is 8%. And in fact, only half of that relates to improvement as opposed to maintenance and adaptation. That's a paltry amount, Cabinet Secretary. So surely you must agree that, if we're to see Inverness and Aberdeen connected to allow the renewable engines of Powerhouse achieve what they can achieve, they must have dual carriageway links, as must the south of Scotland, the A1, the A77. How on earth are we going to achieve all these things unless we change our priorities and find different ways to raise capital for these vital projects?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, of course, Fergus Ewing will be aware that capital funding is constrained, and as well as the roads programme, there is also the housing investment, which of course we are investing £4.9 billion, £4.1 billion of which is public capital money. And I am assuming Fergus Ewing would support the investment in housing as well as the investment in roads. And of course the constrained capital position is exactly why we are looking at revenue finance options that are being considered, including all the procurement options being looked for the A96. So we will continue to do that to ensure that we can make sure that we can invest in our infrastructure, because we know how important that is to growing our economy.
Thank you. That concludes general questions. The next item of business is First Minister's questions, and I call Russell Finlay, question number 1.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Child cancer patients Millie Main and Molly Cuddihy. Adult patients Gail Armstrong and Tony Dines. 2 other children, names and ages unknown. All patients at the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital, where they contracted infections and died. Dozens more child patients also contracted serious infections. For years, families suspected that the infections were caused by the hospital's water supply. But they were lied to and smeared. NHS staff who raised concerns were bullied and silenced. The people of Scotland were told there was no problem. But now, after years of lies and deception, NHS bosses admit that it's likely that some infections were caused by the water supply. John Swinney has so far refused to release all of the information that his government holds about this scandal. Will he now do so?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, first of all, I want to express my sympathies to all of those who are grieving the loss of a loved one in these circumstances. I recognise the deep pain, the grief and the hurt felt by patients and their families who provided brave testimony throughout all of these years on the issues that Russell Finlay raises with me. Now, clearly the issues emerged in the course of the last few years, and as a consequence of that, the Scottish Government established a public inquiry led by Lord Brodie to establish the truth about what has happened in this case. And I have every confidence that Lord Brodie, in taking the evidence that he has taken, will provide the open scrutiny and the truth that is required by the families and by everybody else. Now, the Government has shared all relevant evidence that addresses the terms of reference of the inquiry. Nonetheless, if there is anything further related to the business of government, whether that's cabinet minutes or ministerial correspondence, not submitted to the inquiry, then I am happy to release this, subject to any appropriate redactions, such as personal information and the respecting of legal professional privilege.
Russell Finlay.
John Swinney's commitment is welcome, but it should not have taken this long, and there can be no backsliding. The families will be watching. I pay tribute to these families. I cannot begin to imagine the pain they have suffered. I'm in awe of their determination and their dignity. And I think that it's important for Mr Swinney to hear what they are saying. And I quote, "We were all lied to, we were all disbelieved, we were all demeaned and smeared. We have had our families devastated and our lives traumatised. We cannot overstate the level of deceit and conniving cowardice of Greater Glasgow and Clyde Health Board. These families quite rightly expect accountability. They demand a reckoning for the board's leadership. So will John Swinney sack those responsible?"
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, first of all, I acknowledge the pain and the suffering that the relatives of those affected by these circumstances have suffered, and the pain of the loss of their loved ones has been compounded by the tenacious efforts they have had to go to ensure that the truth would be established, which is precisely why the Scottish Government took the decision in 2019 to establish a public inquiry led by Lord Brodie, which, as I said in my first answer, will be determined to get to the truth. Now, there are a variety of issues that we have to await the outcome of the inquiry from Lord Brodie. But what I will say to Russell Finlay today is that in all circumstances, the Government will take seriously all recommendations from Lord Brodie in taking forward the issues that have to be addressed as a consequence of the commissioning of a public inquiry into this issue.
Russell Finlay.
We wouldn't need to spend hundreds of millions of pounds on public inquiries if public bodies simply told the truth. And it's no wonder these families are so angry. The Health Board has not been held to account, but neither has anyone in this government. Nicola Sturgeon was First Minister when the hospital began treating patients on the 27th of April 2015, just 10 days before a general election. During the SNP election campaign, she kept bragging about the new hospital. For years, Nicola Sturgeon dismissed growing concerns about infections being linked to the water supply. But now, the NHS have dropped the bombshell. They've told the public inquiry. Pressure was applied to open the hospital on time and on budget. And it is now clear that the hospital opened too early. It was not ready. So let me ask John Swinney a straight question. Did Nicola Sturgeon or anyone else in the SNP government apply political pressure to open the hospital before it was ready?
First Minister.
The direct answer to that question is no.
Russell Finlay.
Well, if the Scottish Government didn't apply pressure, who did? And why did they do so? This is one of many serious scandals involving Scotland's public bodies in recent years, from Police Scotland, the Crown Office, the NHS and more. This SNP government presides over a cynical culture defined by arrogance, secrecy and cover-up. A culture of zero accountability that misuses taxpayers' money to crush victims and to silence concerns, and which treats grieving families with utter contempt. The families of the hospital infection scandal are not going away. This is not over. They say that the hospital is still unsafe for patients and that the management cannot be trusted to make it safe. They continue. The people of Scotland demand it to be made safe. So how does John Swinney intend to protect patients and rebuild public confidence in Scotland's largest hospital?
First Minister.
President Officer, I reject the characterisation of the government that Russell Finlay puts to me. And I would cite as an example of that the fact that the government commissioned a public inquiry to look at this very issue. I also would draw on the fact that the government has established public inquiries to look at other major issues where patients have expressed their concern. For example, the inquiry in NHS Tayside about the conduct of Mr El Jamel in his surgery practice, or the issues relating to the death of Sheikh Ubayu. So the government is, and I accept the fundamental point that Mr Finlay makes, that it would be better if we didn't have to have these public inquiries, but when things happen, we have to be prepared to take the steps to investigate and to get to the truth. Now, Mr Finlay raises with me issues of a current nature about the circumstances in the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital in relation to the safety of the water system. And Lord Brodie, the chair of the hospital's inquiry, commissioned reports and audits from the inquiry expert Andrew Poplett on water and ventilation. Mr Poplett's view is that the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital's current procedures for managing the water system are suitable and safe. Providing the evidence to the inquiry in September 2025, Mr Poplett observed that after previously raising concerns, which he did, the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital water system is, and I quote, currently extremely well managed, close quotes, and there had been, quotes, significant improvements, close quotes, made. So that is independent advice that's been provided to Lord Brodie's inquiry, which I put on the record today to reassure members of the public that the safety considerations in the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital are uppermost in the thinking and the minds of Greater Glasgow and Clyde Health Board, and obviously the Government wants to have that assurance, and that inquiry report, I think, provides exactly that. And the last thing I would say is that it is important, vital, absolutely fundamental, that patients who are using hospitals, families that are using hospitals, are assured of the determination to ensure we have a safe clinical environment. And Scotland has advanced a lot of work which has attracted international commendation on the support for patient safety, and that will be one of the key priorities of the Government in making sure that the public can rely on such circumstances in our hospitals right around the country.
Question number 2, Anna Sarwar.
Presiding Officer, much of John Swinney's answers are simply not credible. This week, NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde said of the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital, pressure was applied to open the hospital on time and on budget, and it is now clear that the hospital opened too early. It was not ready. That hospital opened with contaminated water, which infected people and led to the death of at least 2 children. And weeks before the Children's Hospital opened, this internal report warned of a high risk of infections, and therefore a high risk to life for immunocompromised patients. It was ignored. Pressure was applied, and the hospital opened anyway with devastating consequences. So who applied that pressure and why?
First Minister.
President Officer, there are 2 points that I would make to Mr Sarwar. The first is that, as he correctly says, the hospital opened in 2015. The Scottish Government was advised by NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde of a water contamination problem was on the 1st of March 2018. So long after the report that Mr Sarwar raises with me. And the second point is that Mr Sarwar raises with me a point which is absolutely fundamental to the conduct of the public inquiry which Lord Brodie is undertaking. And I acknowledge the significant public interest in this issue, which is why Lord Brodie must have the opportunity to consider and to reflect on the evidence and to set out his conclusions.
Anna Sarwar.
Officer, again, that answer is not credible. It's either at least negligence or more likely criminal incompetence if the Government is suggesting this report was never seen. When this hospital opened, Nicola Sturgeon was the First Minister, John Swinney was the Deputy First Minister and the Finance Secretary who signed the cheques, and Shona Robeson was the Health Secretary. They received this report weeks before the hospital opened, warning of high risks of infections. They ignored it, opened anyway, and children died as a result. For 7 years, families have been lied to. Whistleblowers have been bullied, gaslit and punished, and those who raised concerns were dismissed and patronised. Pressure was applied to open the hospital before it was ready, even though it had contaminated water that risked lives. So I ask John Swinney again, who applied that pressure and why?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, these issues are the substance of the public inquiry, and as I've indicated in my answers already, the Government clearly expected the hospital to open. Preparations were being taken to do that, and the operational responsibility for that lay with NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde. And these issues are the substance of the inquiry that Lord Brodie must undertake. Now, Mr Sarwar said in his question that the experience of whistleblowers and staff and patients and families has been completely unacceptable. And I agree with that. I agree with that wholeheartedly. And that's why the Government set up a public inquiry, because we were so concerned about the circumstances and we felt it was necessary to have a judicially led inquiry to get to the truth, to satisfy the legitimate concerns that exist. And that is what Lord Brodie will reflect on in the course of completing his report.
Anna Sarwar.
Presiding Officer, if Jean Freeman could see a report and stop the opening of a hospital in Edinburgh, why couldn't Nicola Sturgeon, John Swinney and Shona Robison? That gets the heart of the issue right here, because this is the biggest scandal in the history of this Parliament. I first raised this case 7 years ago when whistleblowers came to me with devastating evidence that children had died due to infections, but their parents had never been told the true cause of their death. One of those parents was Kimberly Darrick, the mother of Millie Main. Millie was in remission, but died after contracting an infection from the water. She was 10 years old. Millie was forced to fight not only cancer, but an unseen danger inside those hospital walls. And every step of the way, the Health Board and countless SNP ministers closed ranks and denied there was a problem. People have died. Their families deserve the truth. A hospital was opened too soon with contaminated water, which infected patients, which led to deaths. And the Health Board say pressure was applied to open it before it was safe. So for the third time, tell the truth. The Health Secretary at the time is sitting right next to the First Minister. He was the Deputy First Minister and the Finance Secretary. They could ask Nicola Sturgeon too. Tell the truth. Who applied the pressure and why?
First Minister.
I've already answered that question to Mr Finlay in the answers that I set out. And what I would say to...
Let's hear the First Minister. Let's hear the First Minister.
Is that the Government, when the Government became aware of these issues, when the water contamination incident was raised with the Government on the 1st of March 2018, there then followed a sequence of events that led to the establishment of a public inquiry, which is to get to the truth about all of these issues.
First Minister, sorry, I'm very keen to ensure that everyone in this chamber, those in the gallery, can hear what's being said. First Minister.
So the circumstances, once the Government had these reported to the Government in March 2018, there then put in place a sequence of events that resulted in the establishment of the public inquiry, the substance of which is considering all of this evidence. And that is what the Government has done to make sure that we face up to the issues that are raised here, and that we provide answers to the family of Millie Main and others who have suffered so significantly as a consequence. And that's the commitment the Government has put in place, and that is the commitment that Lord Brodie will fulfil.